Hello, today we have two therapists discussing narcissism, but we're going to do something different. We're going to go to the movies and talk to you about a movie, in particular Gaslight, and what the relationship is between this and narcissism and psychology. So before we get started on that, we'll introduce ourselves. My name is Jeannine Vegh, and I'm an independent marriage and family therapist in the Columbus, Ohio area. I work with survivors of narcissism in my practice, and I also teach a course for this on Udemy.com, and all of that information will be given to you at the bottom of this video. And with me today...
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Miller. I am a licensed independent social worker in private practice in Westerville, Ohio. I too work with individuals who have been involved with narcissists, but I also work with narcissists themselves.
And so these episodes that we've been bringing to you, called Two Therapists Discuss Narcissism, you can find them on YouTube. And if you could just subscribe to that after you watch the video so that you can find out more of our videos when we make them. And what we're doing is we're trying to educate the public about the topic of narcissism from a psychotherapist perspective. And so today we're going to be discussing Gaslight, which is a movie that was directed by George Cukor in 1944, and it stars Charles Boyer, Ingrid Bergman, and Angela Lansbury. So as we talk about Gaslight and what this relationship is to psychology and narcissism and, of course, antisocial personality disorder, what I was hoping, Elizabeth, is that you could start us off by talking about how the audience could know that this is a movie about narcissism from the beginning of the movie. Like, what did you see?
Sure, I'd be glad to talk about that. What I'd love, though, Jeannine, is you to explain how the title Gaslight is relevant to today.
Okay. Well, the movie Gaslight is actually where they got the term gaslight from. So if you hear that phrase gaslighting, the man is gaslighting me or the woman is gaslighting me, that's where the term comes from, is from this movie. And what it's basically meaning is that the person will sort of flip the script on somebody. They will make them believe something that's not true, which is kind of the whole story that you're looking at here in Gaslight. And we'll bring up different parts of the movie as we go on in discussing this.
Okay, I just thought that was very interesting. That's where the term gaslighting came from, because
nobody knows that.
Nobody knows that, and now we use it, as a regular part of our vernacular to talk about certain behaviors, whether they're narcissists or not, when someone's gaslighting them, right? Mm-hmm. So that's where it came from. Well, Jeannine had seen this movie more than once. This was my first time seeing it, and I was struck by how well they got it from the moment you start watching it. So it's in 1944, right? So it's a whole different era, and women's roles were different, men's roles were different. But the behavior by the character Gregory, who is the narcissist, or the antisocial, we'll talk more about that. I mean, that starts early on with what we would term today as love bombing.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
He's extremely attentive and affectionate and demonstrative, and sweeps her off her feet, right? Let's just put it that way. And he is charming, and he is sophisticated, and Ingrid Bergman's character, Paula, didn't stand a chance, I think.
Exactly.
And also, we certainly don't want to tell you how the movie plays out. Well, I guess we're going to have to, though, right?
Yeah.
I guess we're going to have to. We're going to spoil it.
I meant to say that there are going to be a lot of spoilers here.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of spoilers. But the character of Gregory finds Paula at a very vulnerable time in her life and knows exactly how to capitalize on her vulnerability.
Exactly.
And just dives right in there.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you were talking about how they captured this so well, because in 1944 nobody was using the term gaslight, and gaslight, the reason it's called gaslight has to do with something that Gregory is doing throughout the movie. Once they get married and they move into her home that she's inherited. So it has to do with that, dimming the gas lights, which would have been the type of, not electricity, but the type of lighting that would have been in that time period. So that's where they came up with the term. I mean, that's why they were using that term in 1944. So Paula, her when we first come to the movie, her aunt has died. Her parents, that we don't know anything about, died a long time ago, and the aunt took over raising Paula, and then she's killed. The person who kills her is trying to steal her jewels, but somehow they get thwarted because Paula is coming down the stairs, and so the murderer runs off, and so we start the movie not knowing who the murderer is, and not really having a lot of background. And so what's interesting is when Paula goes off to, I think, Italy, to become an opera singer, because that's what her aunt did, and suddenly they thought maybe she should go into this business too. But what is really fun foreshadowing at the beginning of the movie is Paula is singing and Gregory is playing the piano, and her teacher is kind of wondering why she's so frustrated, and she foreshadows the movie by saying, I've just never been through a tragedy in my life before, so I don't know how I can really feel this music that I'm singing. So I thought that was a wonderful beginning part of the movie to sort of set us up and, what's going to happen? And then what I also love is that her instincts, which clients, in retrospect, when I'm working with them, when Elizabeth is working with them, I will often ask, what do you remember when you first met this person that your gut was telling you that maybe something wasn't quite right here? And in this movie, Paula is saying at the beginning of the movie to Gregory, everything's happening so quickly, I feel like I need to get away for just a week to make sure my feelings are still there and to think about things. So she's trying to steady herself. She's trying to keep herself in balance. And what happens?
Well, I'm going to add a little content.
Okay.
So Gregory is the piano player when Paula is learning to become an opera singer. Okay, so that's when we first see Gregory, is as the piano player, who is accompanying Paula when she's becoming an opera singer. And the movie shows us very quickly that Gregory, the piano player, has swept Paula off her feet, and he's trying to rush through this relationship and rush Paula into a relationship, even marriage he talks about. So Paula,
because in that time period, that would have been the most appropriate thing to do.
Well, certainly in that time period, but for a narcissist as well.
Right.
Right? If from a narcissistic perspective, the intensity can be turned on very quickly like that. Especially because we find out later on that Gregory had an ulterior motive. So what happens, what Jeannine is referring to, is Paula says, I need to take some time. This is going very fast. I need to go away. I'm going to go away to this place, and then we'll talk when I come back. She gets off the train at the place she's going to, and Gregory is there waiting for her. And he says, is this okay? And she said, yes, of course, it's wonderful. And he continues with the love bombing there, even though he violated her request, which was to take some time by herself. He continues with the love bombing there, and he then they move to marriage very quickly.
Yes, and that's really that's a fun part too, because in the movie they show you at the honeymoon place, wherever that is, and they're in a really nice fancy hotel. And what I noticed is that at this point he's not really saying "I love you" or "You're the most wonderful thing to me." He's not. The charm is starting to wear away already on the honeymoon stage. Instead, he's focused on the manipulation now, but in a very charming way. And so we see them sitting on the steps together of this lovely hotel, and he's talking to her. Well, she's asking him where would he like to live. And he's saying to her something along the lines of some beautiful house in London. And I think he mentions the actual location, which coincides with where her inherited townhome is, that she has no idea he already knows about and that he's already very aware of. And that's the reason why it's manipulation, is because he's conning her into telling him, let's move into your home that you've just inherited, without her having any idea that he knows the first thing about her. And so it's really fascinating to watch how that conversation takes place on those hotel steps, and how Paula is just so captivated with the fact that, wow, I just happen to have a townhome in that center of the square in London, and I'm just so fascinated that you want to live the same place that I just happen to live at.
It's meant to be, right?
Yeah, that's what she's thinking.
This is amazing. It's meant to be.
Right.
And of all people, right?
Okay. So what we come to find out in the movie is that there's something about Gregory's personality that's a little different than narcissism. And what we're looking at is antisocial personality disorder, because this movie is going to be about a crime that's going to take place. And so Elizabeth is going to talk about some of the different traits of antisocial personality disorder, which also has the narcissistic traits attached to it.
We see early on the way Gregory is grooming Paula, right? And grooming in the way as far as how he wants her to think about her reality, about the world, he's building a case for her becoming completely reliant upon him, which is very classic narcissism.
Or the word codependent, that a lot of people like to use.
Sure, yes. But she ends up, like many people who have been in a relationship with a narcissist, she ends up becoming very isolated from the rest of the world. So again, this all feels very narcissistic. But as the movie plays out, what we come to realize is it is criminal behavior. Gregory has, the manipulation is for a specific reason, and that is to eventually find his way back to the house that Paula grew up in, where her rich aunt lived, and find the jewels that her aunt owned, because the jewels were never recovered after the murder of her aunt. So that was the whole motive for Gregory. So beyond some of the narcissistic traits that we see, the narcissistic behaviors, and when we get into let's say a higher level personality disorder of antisocial, they have an uncanny way of ignoring the rules and regulations that apply to everybody else to the extent of criminal activity. They disregard right and wrong. Their lying is to specifically exploit others for some gain for themselves. They can be callous, cynical, and disrespectful of others. They use charm or wit to manipulate. Again, some of these are going to feel like narcissism. They have reoccurring problems with the law, which we see in the movie that Gregory did. They violate the rights of others through intimidation and dishonesty, which he did repeatedly with Paula. Gregory had the impulsive anger that we often think of with some narcissists who have anger issues, and that definitely was displayed in the movie. Hostility, irritability, agitation, aggressiveness, or violence, a lack of empathy for others, and a lack of remorse for harming others. Okay? Again, some of the narcissistic traits. But you will come to find out that Gregory takes it up a notch. He is trying to drive Paula mad.
Yes.
Right? So he can have her put away into a psychiatric unit, and he can then have access to all of the jewels.
Right. And her money.
And her money.
Because if she's in the psych hospital, she won't have access to anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to clarify that all of those signs that you're talking about, the manipulation and the coerciveness, these are things you do see with a narcissist. But a narcissist, the minute they commit a crime, then we look at calling it antisocial personality disorder, not narcissism. So I just wanted to readdress that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yes. So those are the things that you...
Let me have that back.
Oh, sure. No problem. Those are the things you'll see in the movie. And the behavior, Gregory's behavior just escalates and escalates and escalates. He becomes more hostile. Jeannine can talk a little bit about some of the roles of the maids, and that's what they were back then, the maids in the household, and how he elicits their help in driving Paula mad. He even manipulates Angela Lansbury's character so that she will help him with driving Paula mad.
Paula crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's very fascinating, that part of the movie. This is, I think, Angela Lansbury's very first time to be in a movie. And she did a stunning performance as this manipulative maid who collides with the antisocial Gregory. So in that time period, a maid's role was to assist the mistress of the house.
That's what she was called.
The mistress of the house. Yeah.
Yes.
And so in that time period, it was the woman's role to train the maid and teach her how she would want her to clean the house, and how she would want the linens to be folded, when they would have dinner, what they would have for dinner, planning the meals, all that sort of thing was the mistress's job, to teach the maids on what their responsibilities were in the house. But what Gregory does is he actually goes out of his role as a husband, and because actually you don't really see him going to work in this movie. I mean, suddenly he's not playing piano anymore.
I don't know what he does.
I know what he's doing. He's I remember he was creating new songs. And that's what he was doing during the day, was going out to write music.
Well, that's what he said.
Right,
But
that's what he said.
But he was actually upstairs.
Yes.
Rummaging through the attic to
Looking
find
for the
jewels.
jewels. Yeah, exactly. So, and Angela Lansbury's role, and I keep saying that because I really don't think she had a name in the movie. I think it was just the maid. But she came to the home sort of like a promiscuous lady, and we know in the movie that she has quite a lot of gentlemen suitors, so she's a bit flirtatious, and she's trying to flirt with Gregory and get him. She's thinking she's going to get more from him, and he doesn't necessarily make her do anything to make that happen, but he does use his body language and sort of toying with her like a cat does with a mouse. He toys with her into thinking that might happen, but it never actually does. But so he teaches the maids what they're going to be doing. There's a scene where he asks Angela Lansbury's character to teach Paula how to do her makeup, which is totally demeaning to a mistress of the house. to ask the maid to teach the mistress anything that the mistress hasn't asked them herself. And then also when it comes to missing objects in the house, which is going to start happening, that's the whole game that he plays to manipulate Paula, is that he brings the maids into the room and says, did you move that picture? And they will say, no, I had no reason to move that picture. And then he's saying, Paula, I don't understand. The maids had nothing to do with this. So again, he's putting her down in front of these maids and just making her look like a really horrible person in society, because the maids would traditionally go out and spread rumors in the public to other people through other maids. And so it's just a really terrible thing to be doing to his wife.
So I'm wondering if we can't share some of the specific scenes that would be classic in a narcissistic relationship. So one that jumps out at me is Paula and Gregory are walking through the park or through the city,
yes.
and there's a man standing there, and he sees Paula, and he knows that this woman Paula resembles Paula's aunt, and he knew her aunt. So he looks at Paula, Paula looks at him just as they're walking through, and Gregory becomes tremendously jealous and then accusatory of knowing the gentleman and of wanting to know what her motives are with the man and how they know each other and how she's keeping a secret. This was classic behavior of a narcissist often in a relationship. Something sets him off related to another man, and they become very impulsively jealous and then accusatory.
Yeah.
I thought that was something to highlight.
Exactly. That's also a bait and switch, because the gentleman also recognized Gregory and Gregory recognized him, but he wanted to kind of take that away from the situation and not have it on him.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't
Sure,
want
yeah,
Paula
in
to
the
know.
context of the movie, yes, that was what was happening, but I just wanted to highlight that particular behavior because that's something you often find in narcissistic, in a relationship with
Turning
a
the situation around.
and jealousy.
Mm-hmm.
Jealousy and then, accusations based on whatever they're manufacturing in their mind.
Exactly. And so some of the statements that he made to Paula in the scenes were, like, for example, when they're getting ready to go out to the one time they're getting ready to go out for the evening, and I think there was 2 times they were getting ready to go out for the evening. One time was when he brought the maids in to look at the missing photo on the wall, the missing painting on the wall. And so Paula thinks something really wonderful is going to happen, and he turns it around by, again, a bait and switch. Now it's about the missing picture, so now her whole evening is ruined. She's no longer happy in that happy state of mind. But then there is a scene where they do go out for the evening, and there's something to do with a locket that he gives her before they go out for the evening, and it's a locket that supposedly was passed down through his family, and he gives it to her, and he says something to her like, you might misplace the locket. So he's setting her up by making her think like she's an idiot, she doesn't know what she's doing. And I think I don't remember where it happens in the movie, but there's a part where he calls her absent-minded. So he's starting to use criticism in talking to her, and contempt even, because it's like, I'm better than you, I can handle this situation, which is a couple of the Four Horsemen, as Gottman would say, that comes up in this character sketch.
I want to point out too that what makes Paula vulnerable to this is that she's lost her aunt. She's lost, I don't know that we ever find out about her father, but she lost her mother. She's young. She is insecure and trying to figure out her life. It was prime for Gregory to come in and be her knight in shining armor, right? And that often is something that we will find in relationships with narcissists.
Yes,
right?
They kind of suck onto the vulnerability of that person.
Well, and the vulnerable person, okay, again, now moving out of the antisocial part of the movie for a moment, because that's the criminal part. The narcissist often will really enjoy having someone who is frail or vulnerable or passive, because what they have to offer works, right? The grandiosity is met with someone who really admires them and feels like they've met.
Puts them on a pedestal.
Right.
Puts the narcissist on a pedestal.
Yes, absolutely. And in the movie, and I want to point this out, so the gentleman who saw Paula on the street ends up helping her in the end, right? And I say this to my individuals sometimes who come in and say they're married to a narcissist. They'll say, well, what happens if I stay? And I said, well, you're at risk of, for lack of a better phrase, losing yourself, right? There's so many compromises that you have to make to live with a narcissist that, like Paula in the movie, as it progressed, she had no self-confidence left.
No sense of her own self.
None. She was just completely taken care of by Gregory and afraid to make any of her own decisions. And it's not until this other man comes in to change her reality and say, hey, this is what you're actually dealing with your husband, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, and so I wanted to talk about the scene in Society before we start to go into the survivor coming out, because I think that's very poignant. The end of the movie when he does begin, when it's the inspector that is able to elicit that survivor coming to the fore. But I just wanted to describe the one scene in Society, which again was a way of really ruining her character in front of other people, and that's when they get into the home of some respected aristocrat in the neighborhood, and they're listening to a concert in the living room. And there's a crowd of people there, and suddenly Gregory needs to bring up that missing locket, and Paula starts looking looking through her purse to try to find it, and she can't find it, and she's devastated, and I think she lets out a whimper or something, and people are suddenly like turning their heads like, what are these two doing? And then eventually it causes a scene. And then she walks out with Gregory, and everybody's looking at them, and of course lots of rumors are going to be started from this scene, and her reputation is going to be totally demolished. And it also gives Gregory enough evidence to later, when he's talking about putting her in an insane asylum, he's already got all these people in society that can easily agree that she is a bit nutty, that her character's a bit off. So I just wanted to describe that. But let's talk about how Paula begins to shift in this movie towards the end, and the survivor is beginning to emerge from what she's learning about herself. The inspector coming to the house.
Yes, remember? Yeah. Oh, I do remember. I was thinking I was relating it to something present day with Ted Lasso, and I couldn't add that in at the end of the discussion. But yeah, he comes to the house. I mean, this is a movie made in 1944, so it's much different than watching a movie today. It was very quickly, but he realizes that Gregory is the inspector realizes that Gregory is a criminal and what his motives are, and he comes over and through a series of events is able to show Paula that this indeed is what has been happening to her.
But the glove, mention that.
Oh no, go ahead. You want to.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well,
detail.
she's about to toss him out because she's not even wanting to trust him.
Mm-hmm.
But so what the inspector did ahead of time was he brought a glove that her aunt had given to him, and he knew it was one thing that was going to keep her from throwing him out if he showed her that glove,
Okay.
which she talks about earlier in the movie. She shows it to Gregory and talks about this whole story about it. Mm-hmm. And so he brings this glove out, and the look on Paula's face when she sees that glove, you begin to see something shift inside of her. Just like we do when we're working with survivors of narcissists in our office, and we see that moment, that aha moment, where they begin to have a breakthrough and they begin to realize, oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. But she did in the movie what a lot of people do is she first denied it.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't want to believe it. She thought Gregory has always been taking care of her and had her best interests at heart, until the inspector's able to fully prove to her that no, your reality is not what you thought it was.
Yes.
Right? It's a different reality. Which, like Jeannine said, this is where she starts to reconnect or connect maybe for the first time with her strength. And again, I don't know if you want to get into the details, but through a series of events, Gregory is captured, if you will, by the inspector, and he is tied up while they're waiting for the authorities to take him out. And there's a scene with Paula and Gregory.
Yeah, and I love that scene because this is where I think it's what every victim would like to have, is that moment of glory where the person can't go anywhere, they can't do anything, and they get a chance to just to yell at him and say what they've always wanted to say. And so that rarely is going to happen. But Paula sees Gregory tied up, asks the inspector, can she have a moment with him? And in that moment, she turns back on Gregory all the manipulation he's been doing throughout the whole movie in a very sarcastic way. And he's trying to do his best to get her to untie him, but she's not going to do it. She's not having it.
No, she's not going to do it. But then when they finally escort him out, he is not contrite whatsoever. He's exactly as you would expect him to be, which is arrogant and smug and narcissistic, right? just which gets to the whole sense of not having that ability to really ever have a meaningful relationship with people who have this.
Exactly.
Right? That there was never any true love or affection or connection with him.
The whole point of the movie was that he wanted to get those jewels, and that was all that was important to him in life. And he married Paula just for the simple fact of getting those jewels and setting her up to be in that situation, which was a wonderful movie. It was a great movie. We got to learn about gaslighting, and this became a term that we use even today, and all from gas lamps.
Yeah, all from gas lamps. There are lots and lots of other movies that show examples of narcissists or being in a narcissistic relationship. This one, of course, is quite old, but nonetheless important for many reasons, and for the one that Jeannine spoke about with the whole idea of gaslighting. And if you all enjoy hearing us talk about these movies, feel free to respond on our YouTube correct?
YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Yeah, Two Therapists Discuss Narcissism. At the moment, you're subscribing to Jeannine Vegh, but we have several episodes that we've already created, and we have a thumbnail sketch, so you'll be able to catch them and see which ones are going to come together by doing that. And please leave your comments. Let us know what more you'd like us to be discussing in relationship to narcissism, and if there's any other movies that you'd like to see us talking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What are we talking about next time?
Well, so we were discussing what we were going to be talking about next
Okay.
time, whether it was going to be another movie or whether we were going to talk about social media. So I think both of those options are on the table, and so it'll probably be, we were talking about It's Complicated with Alec Baldwin and Meryl Streep, which is a movie we've already both seen, and we've got some notes about that. And we also want to talk about social media in another episode and how that impacts people when they are viewing social media from unprofessionals who are talking about their personal experiences, the pros and cons of that.
Yeah. So we will decide, and certainly we'll take into consideration any of your comments. So thank you.
Thank you for coming to listen to Two Therapists at the Movies, and we look forward to joining you again in the near future.
Thank you.